Compact, full-range cinema zooms covering full-frame sensors at an affordable price are rare. But have the lens gods finally heard my prayers? Here's my review of the Laowa Ranger Cinema Zooms. As a documentary filmmaker shooting mostly on full-frame cameras, I'm facing a constant battle. What is the best zoom to use to stay decently small with my kit, but still be able to cover the full zoom range that I need? Well, usually the answer has been photo zooms. They're small and affordable, and some of the downsides are they're hard to focus manually, no smooth zoom operation is possible, and it's also impossible to use with a follow focus. And often also inconsistent in the look they deliver across the range of several lenses, because that's not a priority for photo lenses as opposed to motion picture lenses. Well, in the last few years we've seen the emergence of more affordable cinema zoom lenses, but it's been a much slower development than affordable primes, simply because they are harder to make. And that's also important to point out, many of these more affordable cinema zooms are made for super 35mm and not full-frame sensors. The reason is simple: it's very hard to make a full-frame cinema zoom and keep the size, weight and price down at the same time. In comes Laowa with their Ranger series, and somehow they seem to have figured out that problem. The Laowa Ranger 28-75mm and the 75-180mm are both less than 20 cm or 7.5 inches long. They weigh only 1.4 kilograms or just over 3 pounds each, and both feature a fast t2.9 aperture. Interestingly, only recently they announced an even lighter version of both of these lenses, which sheds around 10% of their total weight. Now, this might not sound like a lot, but in fact it will make them easier to balance on a gimbal with a small camera, so that's very welcome. Now, the zoom range of those two lenses is really decent and covers much of what is needed in day-to-day shooting scenarios. Laowa also announced that there will be a third wider zoom added to the lineup, covering 16-30mm. This will complete the Ranger line, and then it will give a huge range that covers all the focal range needs of a documentary filmmaker like me. But before we dive deeper into the more technical details of those lenses, let's take a quick look at some footage that I shot with these lenses. Please let us know what you think about the look of those lenses in the comments below this video. I personally think that they strike a nice balance between sharpness and a non-digital look that doesn't attract too much attention to itself. It seems like these are great all-rounder lenses for individual projects. Now, the closest comparison to the Laowa Rangers will be the DCO film Kata zooms, which are also made for full-frame sensors and which I reviewed before. But the Laowa Rangers look distinctively less vintage than the Kata zooms, giving an overall sharper look, which is welcome and makes them very versatile as regular go-anywhere-with-me zoom lenses. Before we continue, here's a quick commercial break. You might know that we run the best filmmaking education platform in the world, MZ. Among the hundreds and hundreds of hours of courses that we have on the site, there are many courses that educate you on lenses. One of them is called The Secret of Optics by Cine, which teaches you the basics of lenses, what they do, how they do it, what types of lenses there are, so you have a solid foundation for selecting and operating lenses. We also have the Anamorphic Cookbook, the ultimate course about the history of anamorphic lenses and how to put together your own rig, and Anamorphic It Until You Make It, a course on how to modify lenses and experiment with filters and post-production techniques to fake the anamorphic look on a budget. All these courses and 50 more are part of MZ Pro, our filmmaking course subscription. We add new courses all the time, do regular gear giveaways among members, and so much more. Check it all out on mz.com. And now back to the Laowa Ranger lens review. Now, apart from their identical weight, it's also great that both Laowa Ranger lenses share an 80mm diameter for clamp-on matte boxes and a 77mm filter thread for screw-on filters. The lenses use standard 0.8 pitch gears for zoom, aperture and focus barrels, and when you swap between the lenses on your camera, you will not have to move any follow focus, because the positions of the gears are identical on both lenses. Distances are marked in both feet and meters on both of the lenses. The focus throw is 270 degrees, so maybe a little bit too much to rack focus from macro to infinity without a follow focus, but perfect to control with something like a Tilta Nucleus M remote follow focus system. When rotating the barrels, you can feel some minor inconsistencies, but nothing too noticeable, and it's actually moving quite nicely. And it's a very decent result for the price bracket of those lenses. Having a set of manual CineZoom lenses like the Laowa Ranger Cinema Zooms means that versatility is key. Now, of course, there is no autofocus as with any other cinema zoom, but that has the upside of them being able to be used on practically any camera with their interchangeable mount. And in terms of that mount interchangeability, these ones are among the most versatile cinema zooms I have ever come across. Now, by default, the Laowa Rangers come with the installed PL mount, but you can swap it yourself to the included EF mount. Optionally, you can also buy RF, E, Z and L mounts for these lenses, or you simply use an adapter, like a Metabones, to adapt the EF or PL version of the lenses to one of these shorter flange distance mounts. What's great is that you can also adjust the back focus of the Laowa Ranger lenses using a built-in ring close to the mount of the lenses, instead of having to shim your lenses when changing the mounts. Now, this is something we know particularly well from higher-end broadcast lenses, but it's great that Laowa puts this feature into a cinema zoom, which makes the lives of owner-operators easier, who use their lenses on various camera types, as well as saving a lot of time for rental houses, as this is simply a faster process than shimming a lens. As mentioned in the very beginning, part of the Laowa Ranger's versatility also comes from their coverage of full-frame sensors. If you go beyond the size of a normal full-frame sensor and try them, for example, on something like a red VistaVision sensor, you might run into some vignetting with these lenses. To find out exactly if the Laowa Rangers will cover the sensor of your choice, head over to the CineD databases and check with our lens coverage tool. There, you can combine any lens with any camera sensor in any of their shooting modes to see if a sensor is covered by a particular lens. Building full-frame CineZoom lenses with a range of 28 to 75 and 75 to 180mm in such small, almost identically sized packages is no easy feat. But does it come with compromises to the performance of these lenses? We ran our series of technical tests to find out. First, let's look at sharpness. Looking at the wider of the two zoom lenses at its starting focal range of 28mm at t2.9, we can see that the lens is quite sharp, not only at the image center, but also in the corners already, with only minor sharpness falloff. Not every lens performs this well in the corners when shooting wide open. Of course, when stopping down to T4 and T5.6, sharpness is usually getting better, but we see almost no difference in comparison to the already good performance at T2.9. Corner sharpness seems to decrease on the 28 to 75mm when zooming in further, with less sharpness in the corners at 70mm, for example, but still totally within reasonable limits. I see very similar, maybe slightly better corner sharpness throughout the range of the 75 to 180mm lens. With a longer zoom lens, corner sharpness seems to also be more consistent with hardly any visible change. Now let's shift our attention to distortion and let's take a look at those recordings again. At 28mm with the wider zoom lens, we can definitely see some visible barrel distortion. This is an expected compromise at the wide end of a wide zoom lens that's built with a comparatively small diameter front element like this Laowa Ranger lens. It's a trade-off I'm happy to make as a documentary filmmaker in exchange for having a compact lens. And it's also an issue that disappears quite quickly when zooming in. At 35mm, that distortion is only minimal, and at around 50mm, it disappears. It's noteworthy that with the longer 75 to 180mm lens, there is a little bit of barrel distortion at 75mm visible, but much less than on the wide end of the 28 to 75mm lens. This means that when requiring to shoot at a 75mm focal length, I recommend using the wider of the two zoom lenses to get less distortion. But of course, similar story here on the 75 to 180mm lens. The distortion disappears almost immediately when zooming in from 75mm. Focus breathing within these lenses exists, but seems quite controlled. The 28 to 75 performs better in that regard than its longer focal length brother, but that's to be expected. One of the features that makes cinema zoom lenses stand out from photo zoom lenses is the fact that they should be parfocal, and the Laowa Ranger lenses both stand out in that regard. When you change the focal length with a parfocal zoom lens, the focus at the center is maintained. With the Rangers, we sometimes observe a slight, hardly noticeable focus shift during changing the focal length, but for the price of these lenses, the performance is really impressive in that regard. Making parfocal zooms is no easy task, and it's one of the reasons why high-end cinema zooms are a lot more expensive. But the Rangers do a really decent job considering their position in the market. The minimum focus distance for the 28 to 75mm lens is 49 centimeters or 1 foot and 7 inches, and 75 centimeters or 2 foot and 11 inches for the 75 to 180mm lens. These are quite decent minimum focus distances, especially for the wider zoom. Bokeh looks nice, and subjectively I would call it cinematic looking, though you can recognize the 9-blade iris by the shape of the out of focus highlights, especially at wider focal length. Chromatic aberration is controlled, but there seems to be more of it visible with the longer 75 to 180mm lens. Wrapping up here, I have to say that I really enjoyed my time with the Laowa Ranger Zooms, and I think they are already finding a good spot in the market. Price-performance ratio is certainly great, as they can replace a lot of other lenses in everyday shooting scenarios due to their small size, their weight, their speed, the zoom range, and also the look they produce. Talking about that look, I really like how much they make natural looking, sharp images that really look alike between those two lenses, and they have very little distortion and hardly any other image problems. The image looks cinematic and definitely like it's coming from much more expensive lenses. Overall, I really recommend the Laowa Rangers if you're looking for cinema zooms that punch well above their weight, cover the full zoom range, and don't break the bank. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned to CineD for a lot more reviews like this one. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks.